Good afternoon. We are live. How you doing, Precious?
I am well. It's hump day.
Yeah.
So
It had
had
to
to
come
get it in. I'm
eventually.
shocked I had it. I'm about to say I haven't done it all this time. I've been on great behavior, so it was coming.
Well, at least you don't have a picture of the Sahara there in the background or anything like that.
No. Oh man, that should be a whole bit for next time. Thank you.
Yeah. um, for those of you who are unfamiliar with this program, we are a troupe of stand-up comedians who. Oh no, sorry, that's a different show. This is Sell Like a CPCU, put on by the CPCU Agents and Brokers Interest Group. As always, let me remind you, but you already know the thing. You got to like, comment, subscribe, share, hit the notification bell, retweet, put this out there, get people to notice it and share some of the awesome information that we're sharing in terms of sales tips and tricks and things like that.
Yes.
So today we have an interesting topic. This is something that I know happens in a lot of agencies and brokerages,
Hmm.
but it's not. It's like the hush hush thing. I think that doesn't get talked about in the open all too often until there's a client that just meets this specific kind of
Threshold.
thing,
Oh yeah.
right? Yes, yeah. So we are talking about when you being the agent, choose to fire a client and essentially tell them that they would be best suited going elsewhere. So while I share the feed out on a couple of places, how about you just share your background? Have you ever been in a situation like this, Precious, where you had to kind of get rid of a client and show them the exit?
Yeah, unfortunately, like you said, if you've been doing this for a while, it's inevitable. It comes up. Sometimes it was something that wasn't caught on the onset. Sometimes things change, seasons change, and you kind of meet that inevitable fork, in the road. Um, it's hard because depending on, well, no, I don't even think it's really dependent. The amount of revenue, right? And saying turning away revenue is hard, and it's something that doesn't happen without much thought and consideration. But part of what you shared when promoting our episode today was addition by subtraction, and it really boils down to, does this does this inclusion in our book of business and our clientele, is this a net positive or net negative for us in terms of revenue? Because certain revenue comes with a load of resources that are required to sustain it. And you can get upside down in an account if it's just way too
Yeah.
laborious, if it's just way too, again, it requires too much. It's too, whatever fill in that blank is, it's really important. In order to know what the threshold is, we have to define who are we and what do we want? What do we want this agency to look like? What do we want this book to look like? And it makes it easier to identify the outliers once
Yeah.
you've kind of defined that internally. It's that, what is the word that they use when you're on the cusp of like the black hole? It's the event horizon.
Yes.
Is that
Yep.
what it is? And once you
Yes.
go past the event horizon, that's the point of no return.
Yep.
And, in some experiences I've had, what will get you quickly to this event horizon is unprofessional behavior and disrespect.
Mm.
That's one of
Yep.
those lines for me. When it becomes abusive, when it becomes toxic, when, trust is lost, when I have to rework everything just because, when there's something missing there,
Mm.
that catapults you to the front of the line in terms of the exit door for me. What is
Yeah.
that? What is that trigger for you?
Yeah, yeah. That's I think that's probably the primary and most egregious, and probably the best reason, or the most apparent reason why you would want to get rid of a client. I've had clients in the past that treated the service staff as if they were their own service staff,
Hmm.
and some of the first of all, the raised tones, the language, the name calling, and things like that happen. And you use the word abusive, like, most definitely it was an abusive relationship. And I think what I learned was in the beginning, your first inclination is, oh, we gotta hold on to the revenue, especially if like this is a decent size account, right? But if you have one CSR, you can think of like, okay, maybe it's just like a personality mismatch or something
Mhm.
like that, right? But once you listen to like the recorded conversations and things like that, a lot of times it becomes apparent whether it's a personality mismatch or not. I mean, you can always try and cycle someone else in to be that main point of contact, but realistically, there are just some clients that it doesn't matter how assertive or passive or just like a really good kind of like understanding soul that's on the other end of the phone. Just no matter who is there, they are going to act like, and excuse my French, but a complete bastard to them. Like that's
Oh yeah.
exactly what they're going to do.
Hmm.
And so I think that is a perfect example of, first of all, protecting your staff and your team
Hmm.
from someone who is abusive. And yeah, it also has a domino effect on pretty much everyone around, especially if you keep trying to play, musical chairs and rotate someone in. I mean, like that basically means that every month or every couple of months, someone hates their job because of this one stupid account. What are some other reasons? So if it's obviously abuse and kind of like bad language and stuff like that, are there other reasons that you have come across where it would be acceptable to part ways with a client?
Well, yeah, going back to again the concept of, here we go, boundaries, right? There's
Yes,
all
yeah.
sorts of boundaries that exist. These lines, this is our how we're going to engage with one another.
Mhm.
Sometimes boundaries get blurred, and it's necessary to level set. You
Mm,
know, and when you level set and you have a conversation about this is the path forward, right?
yeah.
So we reconcile everything right here on the table. We're going to reinforce it. And it's so helpful when you have service level objectives, when you have things that you can define for someone,
Mhm.
right? Because we've all experienced at one point or another that customer that simultaneously hit send on the email and dial on the phone.
Yeah. It's a miracle how they're able to do that too.
It's uncanny. I'm like, okay, it's not late before it hits my inbox, right?
Yeah.
And so when you're able to say up front that our goal is to have everything turned around within 24 hours, a business day, or something to that effect, then that's the first measure, that's the first gate that something has to pass to determine if a boundary has been crossed, right?
Yeah.
Because if I'm still within the window of time and you're already complaining about it, then that's where we say, hey, look, this is when you can mutually identify that it's not going to work,
Mhm.
you know, when you get the buy-in that, hey, look, I don't, it's a relationship like any other.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just get to a point in a relationship where I can't be on the defensive all the time. I can't always be sorry for what happened in 1991. I just can't.
I
Now,
no, you don't understand. We need to go back and rewrite time or
like, do you
y-
keep a ledger? Is it
yeah.
personal? Is it just me? Like, every time something was, out of
Yeah.
line, we have to be able to say, it's a new policy period, it's a new month, it's a new year, it's a new whatever.
Hmm.
Let's clean the slate, let's move forward, and let's build trust back. Now,
Hmm.
I get it that the same way it's hard to, they say that, sorry is the hardest word in the English language, right? And there are going to be times when you are going to have to dole out a heartfelt, sincere apology because there was a gaffe, there was a whoops, we dropped the ball, something went wrong, and having an escalation process. Because before we get to the door,
Yeah.
there's plenty of places that we're going to visit on our way to the door.
Sure.
And so, yeah, it starts with, again, establishing boundaries. And boundaries don't necessarily have to be egregious disrespect. Because
Hmm.
to your point earlier, what I have found is that communication styles will vary. Everyone that I do business with doesn't have to communicate the same way that I do, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm, as Tony Kanye's, where is he today? Talks about all the time. I'm like Miss Southern Hospitality, pleases and thank yous and ma'ams and sirs, and that's just how I communicate.
Hmm.
Everyone that I work with is not, from this area, and failure to say ma'am or sir is not alone going to be enough to eject you.
Yeah.
So to your point, maybe it's a personality clash. There he is. He's checking in. Ears are burning.
Yeah, yeah, it can definitely be a personality clash, and to your point, yeah, you don't want to have to relive the past every single time that something is happening. Where like that's the other thing is even if you are, even if you do say you're sorry and make good on it and things like that, if someone just can't like move past that, that's also going to be something that just continues to plague that relationship going forward. And so that's also a very big, either not just warning sign, but it can also be the impediment to having a productive and make no mistake about it, like it needs to be a two-way road. Like this is a business relationship. This isn't
Yes.
like we're not selling bananas, right? Like once the sale of the bananas happens, it's over, right?
Hmm.
This is an ongoing relationship or partnership. So that is something that really needs to at least be neutral, right? Like it can be really good, but at the very worst it should be neutral. If it's negative in terms of that like personality match, you're going to have problems on both sides. And a lot of basically said boundaries aren't invisible. They may not be tangible, but there are ways to measure what they look like, and that's correct, right? Like so, just because the boundary isn't a specific line on the ground, there are certain measures of whether or not the account and the servicing of the account and the relationship is being productive, or
Hmm.
if it's being like you said earlier on, kind of like a drag on business in general. Um, so let me ask you this: in terms of boundaries, and I can't speak to this because one, I've never had it happen to me, and two, I am not in the demographic that has to deal with this the most. But
Hmm.
yourself, being a woman in the insurance industry, do you have clients that fall in love with you or decide that you are a object of affection that needs to be wooed in the process of also doing business? Because I've heard this extremely frequently from women in the industry, and I've had a couple of clients in my former life that had to be fired because they just could not get it through their head that the majority of the CSRs being female did not mean it was a target rich environment to find a date.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, it that I laugh because I think about again being a woman in a still very male dominated industry,
Yeah.
especially when you assume roles like account exec, head of sales, certain roles that you typically don't see women possess.
Yeah.
And it's hard enough to be professional, and especially with certain personalities. I As a salesperson, I firmly believe that sales are mostly psychological, and
Mhm.
so I'm always looking for a way to bond or connect. There have been times when my attempts to connect come across maybe overly friendly or familiar,
Mhm.
and you have to backtrack. And yes, just, the elephant in the room. Sometimes you have customers that just take liberties, right? You hate the fact that they have your direct phone number.
Yeah.
You hate the fact that there was a customer that, I kid you not, the voicemail, the way that he said my name on the
Yeah.
voicemail just gave me the heebie-jeebies every time.
Cringe, right?
Cringe, super
Yeah.
cringe worthy. Oh, look, yeah, Lotta says, yeah, man, I'm sure you've had your share of, business crushes that are like, we just wanna hang out with Matt.
Yeah.
So probably not as prevalent, but yeah, have you ever been in a situation where it's kind of just gotten awkward?
I haven't been in a situation where it's gotten like awkward in terms of people um like making advances on me. I'll put it that way, right? It has gotten awkward in terms of clients that don't do a good line don't do a good job of drawing a line between a business relationship and like a friendship, right?
Hmm.
That's always extremely difficult to navigate. Like I've done business with friends, and we have that conversation where it's like, okay, business hat is on now, so now we're gonna interact as business partners, and then friend hat is on now. Now we can shoot the breeze and whatnot, right? I've had folks that did not start as my friend think that now we were friends, And sometimes those lines got crossed, and sometimes it was difficult to be like, look, right here and now, I can't do you this favor. Like professionally, I can't do that. And then it's like, well, look, I thought we were best buddies and we hang out and we have a drink and all this other stuff. And I'm like, no, no, you don't understand. I was like, I will still hang out with you and go buy you a beer or whatever. But in this, I cannot do it. And if they continue down that road where they think that they deserve preferential treatment because maybe they do want to hang out outside of a professional context, it can be, it can be difficult where, it can lead up to, the crazy I'm your greatest fan kind of situation where it's like, all right, I gotta cut this off. We can't be hanging out anymore. You just end up feeding the beast then. Like you have to kind of like pull it back. But no, unfortunately, I have not had any secret admirers or
I would
obvious
say it's
admirers.
fortunately. I don't know if
Yeah,
that's unfortunately, because it gets awkward. And I'll even speak to, especially in the commercial world, depending on
definitely the
different
beast.
different verticals, different pieces of business, right?
Yep.
It's no secret that I specialize in transportation, and a lot of the clientele that we deal with, they may be over the road, they may be in various stages of, and I won't even just blame it on the male female dynamic. Sometimes,
Mhm.
like if you work with older customers and they want to have longer conversations out of just boredom, when you
Yeah.
have to very politely draw the line. I used to cringe when I traveled for business more frequently
Mhm.
because I'm not and again, it was just my personal preference. I attend happy hours, I don't partake.
Mhm.
Typically, I have conversations, hors d'oeuvres, non-alcoholic drinks, or whatever, but I want to keep my wits about me, especially if I'm traveling alone.
Sure.
You have to be mindful of, for example, when you're on the road, what property you're staying at, who knows, just kind of from a personal safety
Yep.
perspective, and just really making sure people know that everything's above board, right? Everything's in writing, everything, we're talking on recorded lines, there's certain things, on all of our voicemails, I think is pretty standard fare, that you
Yep.
tell folks that, stuff can't be, you can't bind, you can't cancel, you can't endorse on a, cocktail napkin at the corner bar.
Mhm.
We just can't do business that way. And it's for mutual protection. I
Yep.
do this as much for you as I do it for me. And
Yep.
so when people realize that, she's a stick in the mud, she's not that much fun, they move on.
Yeah. I do find that very difficult personally because look, I mean, both you and I are social beings, so we like being in a group and chatting it up and laughing and things like that. I've never turned down a good party. I went to school in New Orleans specifically because of that, or maybe because I went to school in New Orleans, I now have part of that awakened in me. I don't know, but yeah, I find that sometimes I find that difficult where it's like, and again, it's like, wherever that line gets drawn, definitively kind of, dropping it down and saying, look, this is now, but later is later, and, kind of, really kind of being obvious and apparent about, that division. Um, Let me ask you about some like more logistical reasons why you might fire a client. Okay, so
Mhm,
these are less the kind of like human interaction pieces of it, and more the actual business process, right?
mhm.
So I think the classic example is just late or non-payment, right?
Yes.
So if you have a client who habitually is not, on time paying, continually canceling and reinstating or canceling and rewriting policies because of it. Say you do business. Some of our clients are based off of a fee. You
Mhm,
invoice them, and it's 3, 4, 5, 6 months before you get paid on an invoice, and it's killing your cash flow, so to speak. Um, all of those things are logistical reasons why you would want to part ways with a client. And in some ways, it's kind of easier than it would be maybe those kind of like interactive human to human kind of things. What are some
mhm.
other reasons you've seen where you might have to kind of like drop the hammer if just the business part of it isn't working out too well?
Yeah, I think that in a world where, running a digital agency and you have the potential to work with customers in various geographic locations, if you just can't connect in terms of, servicing,
Mhm.
sometimes, I'm very fortunate, central zone, we're central for a reason,
Yep.
so 1 hour this way, max 2 hours, to get to Pacific. But on occasion, it just gets to the point where, I'm not going to be able to man the phones during these hours that you want to talk. And I have to draw the line, now usually the way around that, hey Matt, look, other Matt, the way around that is, by appointment, right? And
Yep.
so if it's a relationship that you really want to retain, and you want to, if you have the bandwidth to schedule, a periodic or one time, off, business hour appointment just to connect and reestablish the relationship. So case in point, I worked at an agency years ago where my book of business was split. I ran a
Mhm.
book that was primarily East Coast and a book that was primarily West Coast. And the reason my book was set up that way is because I was assigned the more challenging accounts.
Yep.
So accounts basically came to me to kind of to rehab, right? So these are
Mhm.
ones that we were on their naughty list, and like, oh, Precious can win them over. If anyone can save it, give it to her. She's gonna save it, right? And
Yep.
so it made for a really long day,
Mhm.
because this is before we were all working remotely and from the comfort of our home. So I
Right.
had to go into the office early. What I ended up doing was almost like a split shift at a restaurant. I would just take an extended lunch to try to catch
Mhm.
up on all the hours that, I was adding to my day by, extending myself from coast to coast. What we
Yep.
ended up doing the compromise because that wasn't viable. That wasn't long term a good solution. And so my East Coast customers knew that yes, when you roll on, I'm still an hour behind.
Mhm.
Anything that you send my way, I'm definitely going to take care of during my day. And it's possible that you're going to get some documents maybe after close of business, right? And
Yeah.
that's just the rotation, and vice versa. My West Coast clients understood that, I was going to start sending stuff their way before they were open for business, and they were going to have this tail where they would send stuff because it wasn't close of business for them. But
Yep.
we established a rapport, and I was able to gain their trust by just being consistent, right?
Mhm.
So that was something that we were able to overcome. But if it's not, if they're scheduling, maybe their board meeting falls outside of your hours of operation and they need somebody local, or they need someone who does the late nights and early mornings,
Mhm.
if that's not who you are, and if you're not, equipped for that, you have to ask yourself, is that enough of a stretch, or am I going to start to set a precedent?
Right, right, right. Yeah. No, and that's a good point too, is you always have to keep your eyes on, like, is that goalpost, or is that kind of like, standard changing over time, right?
Hmm.
And it's tough because you want to help, especially if you're like the main point of contact on an account, right? But at the same time, I mean, I see this a lot in Facebook groups all the time, where scratch agencies and small agencies that have only a handful of staff, folks are calling at odd hours. They're putting in, and there's kind of some technological help there, where it could be like a chat bot or an answering service or something like that, can be there to at least fill in the gap. But the key is that you also need a home life. You need a balance between your work and your personal life. And so that also factors into your ability to do the job. And so if you are getting to one of those situations where the client is perpetually calling you at a time when you're asking them not to, or calling you at the same time, you keep telling them, look, if you call me at 7:30 central, I'm not there. Okay.
Yes.
And then when you need it by 8:30 central, you're not going to have it. So you
Hmm.
need to call me at 4:30 central, and then I will take care of it, those kind of things. But sometimes they still don't get it, like they're too set in their ways, and it can become pretty problematic. I think there are some other examples too in my past, where it was clients that they would perpetually put in requests for changes to coverage, like way after the fact, and then get mad that we couldn't retroactively date those
Mm.
changes back to the 3 weeks when the change actually happened. And then want additional money back, and then when they didn't get additional money back, they were, then we go back into that first pot where they're screaming and ranting and raving and everything like that, right? It's there is that objectivity that needs to go into establishing the boundaries of the relationship. And you want to work with the client, but to your point, like, you have to pay attention to your key performance indicators. Like, if those are dropping because you're trying to be everyone's everything, you're going to not only screw yourself over, but you're also going to screw over all the rest of the clients that are actually doing things fairly standard, or within
Absolutely.
the standard operating procedure. So are you like a 3 strikes and you're out kind of person, or how does that usually transpire for you?
So the escalation and the rehabbing, right? I do think that people can turn things around if you set expectations.
Yeah.
Yes. So to Lotta's comment, the degree of hand holding.
Mm.
When you explain in a tactful way, because all of this, we're not recommending that you just go out there and just curse people out and just,
Yeah, don't
ghost
let
them.
F-bombs go, and no, don't do that.
I heard it live on the live cast and I'm firing half of my book.
Yeah.
No, that's not the messaging.
Don't bill us.
Right. The business income loss as a result of applying some of these techniques, you're going to, retain that risk. But I think it boils down to, once I've made myself clear, because sometimes it's just not evident, right? Now, I would argue that there's certain rules of engagement that are just standard operating procedure. It's expected, right? But again, there may be places where this is their first time having this sort of relationship, this level of a professional relationship. So I give them a pass, right? So the first time is just kind of, okay, we'll take care of what you need. However, moving forward, I am going to have to respectfully ask that requests are sent in writing, that we abide by the business hours, that, these sort of things, especially the ones that are habitually, when everything's a rush.
Yep.
Everything's a rush. Everything is overdue. Everything is urgent. And so that's when you just want to remind them sometimes, right? Because that's where some of the, strategy and the coaching comes in, and say, hey, so here's a pro tip. Before you bid on the work, you might want to check with us, right? Mm-hmm. Just make sure we're good. So let's just see if there's maybe some sequencing that you can plug in the insurance trigger a little bit earlier, in the process. And that just makes for a better experience overall. The carrier has their time to do their thing. You've got your time to put your packet together. Everybody is happy. Is that something that's viable? Being able to parse out what is within my wheelhouse and what is not. Sometimes they come and they want everything from business advice, legal advice, insurance advice, financial advice. It's like, whoa. I appreciate that you have so much confidence in me. But I'm going to have to insist that I redefine, this is the scope of the nature of this relationship, right? And so if we've had this conversation and they've been in the timeout box and they refuse to adapt behavior, that's when we get to, okay, because we can't seem to come to an agreement. Before my insurance life, I worked in call centers, believe it or not. And we had an escalation process, especially when it came to use of like profane language, right?
Yep.
And so the first time sir, ma'am, if I'm going to be able to assist you, I'm going to have to ask that you refrain from using that sort of language, right. Which was slightly comical to me because sometimes that was just the gasoline. Yeah. What? You can't tell me how to talk. Sir, ma'am, again, I'm just going to have to ask you. But again, we did have that 3 strikes and you're out rule. In the agency environment, it's not that cut and dry, unfortunately. Having some sort of escalation or someone to back you up or support you, if you're in a agency environment where you have colleagues and you have leadership. And for leadership, it's super.
Did I lose you? I think I might have lost Precious. Yeah, so in the agency environment, it is a little bit different. You have competing goals there.
Important that we express.
Oh, she's reconnecting. Did we get you back, Precious?
Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm just somewhere.
Somewhere
I
in
was on a
between.
roll.
Yeah, no, so you were saying that there are competing things, right? So I guess you were talking about, say, management in terms of their,
The
how
support.
they look at things, and whether or not, obviously, maybe there's financial, implications and things like that that go with it.
Yeah, because sometimes, they may benefit from hearing from someone else. It's
Hmm.
that classic, retail, transaction where someone comes in, they ask for something that's outside of the scope of what's allowable, but you
Yeah.
have management who are maybe able to make an exception, and they
Mm.
come in as long as they communicate that this is an exception and it was their discretion to make, because we don't want to train our customer. We don't want to encourage bad behavior, and
Yeah.
we don't want to, obviously, just maintaining the relationship. And so even if we as agency principals have to come in and make an executive decision, it is super important for the morale, for the culture, for the employee, that we explain that it was our call to make. And so
Hmm.
oftentimes once any sort of interchange has become contentious, that's when I that's how I started inheriting accounts, right? I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
so, we've got to get through a couple of smooth transitions, transactions with this customer first before I
Hmm.
introduce them to someone else. And
Hmm.
it's not punitive. It's not because someone did anything wrong. It's just that I get an opportunity. I'm kind of the cool off period,
Hmm.
and then let me introduce you to someone and explain, that I'm still going to be present, but, hopefully you can kick it off again, because we do want to retain accounts that make sense, if there's an ability to retain it. But we
Yeah.
also have to learn that saying no is not a bad word.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's no is good when it's strategically used, right? So when it's just a bad fit, if it's just a bad, toxic relationship, I mean, that's obvious. The other time when it's a little bit more difficult is like what you're talking about. It just doesn't fit the target market, or it doesn't fit something that, it's a state that you don't write in, right? And now all of a sudden you have to go through and get licensure and qualification and everything like that. And now you're like, okay, we've gone through and done all of that, jumped through all those hoops, and now we have one piece of business written there. Are we going to write more business there? If the answer is
Mhm.
no, then even if it is, a decent commission, 5, 10, 15 grand, maybe it's still not worth it, right? I mean, it's also another state that you have to worry about tax implications and all kinds of, and regulatory implications and all kinds of other stuff, right? And so that's always something that has to be taken into account, is that more strategic no that is sometimes more difficult to make, right? Because it's the money is there to take, right? Like, or the money is there being made already, and maybe you have someone higher up, right? Like if it's a large enough broker, whoever's the head of that agency, that location, they have to answer to someone higher up. And when the
Mhm.
numbers don't look good, 1 month or 1 quarter, because you had to, bump 2, 3, 4 accounts that just didn't meet the mix, like you have to telegraph that first off, and then ultimately you're going to have to answer for it. I think another dynamic here is, in those agencies that are set up with a dedicated production staff versus a dedicated servicing staff. That's always tough to navigate it too when you're firing a client, because the producer feels like that's my client, right? Like
Right.
I went out, I developed a relationship, I brought them in, and now they're having a hard time relating to your people. Sometimes the producers don't even think of themselves as necessarily part of the same team, right? Like they
Mhm.
think they're kind of their own lone wolf, so to speak. And they're like, well, the service people just aren't getting along with them. I shouldn't have to be hurt financially because they can't deal with this person. I've seen a number of different ways of dealing with that. One of which, and I wonder if you've seen others, but one of which has been, the agency principal, or the head of the agency just being like, all right, producer, you're now the point person on everything. Service, renewal, you want the money so bad, you're going to do it, because everyone else here basically will not work on this account anymore. It is
Mhm.
toxic. If you want to continue to earn on it, you need to do it all. And most producers will be like, yeah, I'm not going to do that.
Imagine that.
Yeah. But that is tough because, I mean, you're essentially telling someone who works in a production, compensated model, that, they brought something in and now you're going to stop paying them on it. And that's really complicated. Have you seen other ways of dealing with that? I thought that was the most succinct way of dealing with it that I've seen, but
Yeah, I've seen, again, varying levels of um, how do you balance that, right? So I've
right.
seen models where, you may have a service team or CSR that handles all of the routine transactions, but if an account appears to be at risk, if it
Mm,
starts to, kind of show signs that they may be a flight risk,
hmm.
then you pull in the producer, whoever, created that relationship to help with the retention
Right.
efforts. I've
Right.
seen that, right? I've seen where, for example, the producers get looped in when they have an account that maybe cancels prematurely or that requests loss runs. Again, when they start exhibiting this behavior, then, there may be some sort of rescue effort and there may be some sort of, compensation or some sort of split if it requires dual effort.
Yeah.
Now, on the flip side, I do think that a lot of it has to do with how we onboard new clientele. So
Mm,
that what is that transition period? So oftentimes I've seen success when the producer, the account exec, or whoever it is that lands that account explains to the client what their agency experience is going to feel like.
mm,
So that way clients don't feel like, okay, well, you just brushed me off once you collected that down payment. I never hear from you anymore. When you're able to tell them, okay, welcome, thank you. So moving forward, this is who, this is how, this is what, this is why. So setting those expectations, and it doesn't necessarily have to be like some long drawn out meeting. It could be a
mm,
very succinctly worded email, maybe that includes copies of binders, ID cards, deck pages, or something that
right.
says this is a welcome to the agency, you know, um, packet. And
Mm,
so where I find there is friction oftentimes between the sales team and the service team is when you have like subjectivities or things that are actually still dragging from the actual sale.
mm,
And now
yes.
it becomes the responsibility of the service team to chase documents. And then this is when you get discounts that fall off and clients calling in and wondering why pricing is different because Matt told me it was going to be this.
Yep. Yep.
And it automatically creates this rift. And so having some sort of quality control in place so that there's an expectation that part of that handoff process is going to be an audit of some sort to say that we've got everything that we need to reasonably retain this account, and now it's
Right.
going to transition to the responsibility of the retention and the service teams. So
Yeah.
everyone's got skin in the game because keeping accounts, the long term value of a customer, just like in all things insurance, that first year is more of a liability. You've got all these
Mm,
upfront costs between marketing and everything else. And so we really start to see a return once they're into their third, fifth year renewal, whatever that magic number looks like. So
yep.
we don't want to churn and burn.
Right.
We don't want to kick people out before we've had a chance to recoup what we put
Mm,
in to get them. But
sure.
we also have to recognize when it's just throwing good money towards a bad cause.
Yeah. Yeah. And to your point on, the retention piece of it, a lot of times getting the relationship holder, meaning the producer, involved in this conversation can sometimes help as well, right? So that abusive client or that client that is just late on everything, or whatever the issue may be. Um, if the producer is on board knowing full well that you will part ways with that client, they also have a vested interest to get them in line. And so if you can include them, especially if they have a really strong relationship with the client, a lot of times that can help kind of, set that relationship back on, a good standing, or in a better direction at the very least. So, um, yeah, I've definitely run into the situation where it's like the classic example, and I don't know if you've had this in the past, but coverage exposure checklists. So with every single new piece of business, but also every single renewal, in former shops that I've worked in, they had coverage exposure checklists, and so pretty simple, like do you have this type of operation? Is there an exposure? Did we, quote anything for it, and was it bound or not taken? That kind of thing. What was the result? And the producers were supposed to complete those with the client,
Mm-hmm.
and I would have to say that that was what was written in the policy, but in practice, the producers almost never did. They would have the CSRs and things like that go through it, and then they would just sign off on it at the end, which if it's a senior level of account executive, I guess maybe that's okay because if they have a good relationship as well, in the essence of actually getting that done, that's fine. But there are also some other elements here where say a more junior CSR or someone like that who might be working on the account, many times they may just be trying to get that piece of paper done so that
Out
they
the
can
door.
move to the next
Yeah.
thing, right? And so if you go back and you look at a historical record of the account, it's like the same exposure checklist every single year. It's just like copy paste, copy paste, copy paste, right? And
No
so
one does
you,
that.
well, no, of course not. And you come to find out that you have an E&O exposure because
Yeah.
the client took up XYZ new operation and it was never uncovered because that conversation was never had with the client.
Mm-hmm.
So, but that is a perfect example of sometimes producers, or a lot of times producers, just they're on to the next thing. And so anything that you do to try and reel them back into the servicing, or even kind of the day-to-day risk management of the account, is like pulling teeth sometimes. But if you can create a culture that involves them to a certain level and gets them invested in that, then these clients that might eventually get fired, you might be able to preserve a number of them, and not just in the sense of that you tolerate them. They might actually be able to end up becoming some of your better clients that way, because the producer is coaching them through it or holding their hand. Especially if you're like, look, you know, pay attention, check in with this client more often,
Mm-hmm.
because that will take the edge off of the service team, and it will keep us up to speed on these things that have been problematic. And obviously you don't want that to be a long-term thing, because that's also keeping the producer away from going to get more accounts and things like that. But if they are at least over a short run helping to set that expectation and set that practice or that habit, that's a more productive path going forward than just kind of everything happening out on an island, and then the producer getting pissed off when eventually you're like, yeah, we don't write that account anymore. you know that's the other thing. Please telegraph the producer before you show the account the exit,
Yes.
because that.
And how you offboard an account is really a reflection of your agency's, again, character, right? And
Yeah.
so when you get to that point and it's discovered that we are at this crossroad, it is time to say goodbye. Just a couple of, just it boils down to, gentleman's honor, right? If I get a BOR on an account that someone wants to leave, I'm typically going to waive the rescission period.
Yeah.
If someone, again, if you're at renewal and you know that you're not going to have options for them, or just does not make sense to move forward, prepare them an exit package, right? Here are the loss runs. Here are a copy of, old, applications. Here are the documents, because simply because it's not a good fit for our agency doesn't mean that I want to tank your business.
Right.
There's no malice here. I don't want you to go without coverage. I don't want you to struggle in finding another place. This isn't punishment for us not, being a good fit. And so it's really important that, again, even leaving the door open for referrals or for a return if things are to change. It's been a pleasure serving you. Unfortunately, at this time, due to reasons already discussed, we're not going to be able to continue to service your account. However, please find these documents that may be helpful in finding other coverage. And if whatever situation, were to change, we would honor another opportunity, we would be honored by another opportunity to work with you, and so obviously that only works depending on the reasons why you're parting ways, right? Hey, if you ever decide to grow up, then come find me. If you decide not to use potty language, I'll be here, so you might not want to put that in writing.
Yes.
But if it's for other reasons, and just being, don't don't drag it out too much. Try to minimize whatever the collateral damage is going to be. Because oftentimes, if someone is being asked to leave, let's be honest, they're going to take offense.
Yeah.
Okay. And in this day and age, the place that people often take their hurt feelings is social media. And so you have to be prepared to kind of develop a case for what you did, be ready to defend it if it comes down to it, right? I mean, you're not going to necessarily air the ins and outs of every transaction, but just know that there may be blowback if there's related business. And so you have a particular customer that runs particular circles and you no longer do business with them. That's another consideration. There may be fallout altogether with, anyone that they have influence with. Now, on the flip side, the people that know them know them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they may be wondering why you did business with them so long. You never know. It goes both ways. But just make sure that it's not something that blindsides, because the intention is not to cripple someone. Mm-hmm. When you decide to part ways.
Yeah, most definitely. And, so let me ask you this question. I love the idea of preparing them kind of like an exit package. That's a show of good faith. Like, and regardless of the reason for why the parting the ways is happening, at least you're not, just kind of like kicking them out of the boat and saying swim, and so to that extent, do you ever make a referral?
I have. If I know why, and if it's something that I can't service, and if there's very specific reasons, for example, out of appetite, out of the demographic, or something like that, and if I have a connection with someone else who's better suited in that space, I've almost like call ahead seating, right? Hey, I can let them know that you'll be reaching out. I'm not going to pre-discuss the details of your, submission or your needs, because that part's confidential, but I can tell them that, when you call, let them know that I referred you, and I'm sure they'll take good care of you. I prefer that in a situation where I can refer to vetted professionals that compliment and hopefully they reciprocate that favor, if it ever comes up that way. Would I ever set someone up with a ticking time bomb? Probably not. Oh, this one's a doozy. It's a lot of premium, but whew, you're gonna have to work for that one.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's I would agree with you on that one. If it's something that where the client isn't a nightmare and it's just like a bad match for, the reasons that you gave, whether it's just appetite or your capabilities, or just where it's written, or the nature of the risk or whatever. Yeah, no, absolutely no problem giving a referral to another shop that at least has a higher likelihood of being able to take better care of that client. But yeah, I'm not going to. I'm not even going to belabor my enemies with a bad account. I think the way karma works, that account will probably find their way to them anyway. So,
But I'll also say this much. I try in business and in life, whatever my impressions are of a person, a business, a situation, I let people draw their own conclusions,
Sure.
I mean, because oftentimes, you can hit it off fabulously and never run into the same issues that we ran into. And I wish you both well. Now there are times where, you do want, especially if, let's be clear, if the reasons that are raising your, the hair on the back of your neck is because this potential customer is being fraudulent or deceitful or just, shady, I can't disparage them publicly, of course. Hey, FYI, put out an APB, everyone watch out for this one. But at the same time, I think that oftentimes customers underestimate how small the industry really is. That you can't run from owed premium. For example, if you burn too many bridges and eventually you're going to have to find your way back, it is the carrier's discretion not to take you back, and that we as agents, as appointed agents, we're extensions of the carriers we represent. And so we do have an obligation to kind of do some field underwriting or some pre-underwriting, to protect the carrier's interests too. So if someone is, a morale risk, when it comes to, like you said, filling out paperwork, providing things timely, making payments timely, or whatever, that is a legitimate reason, and we're not public service in most cases, we have no obligation to do business.
Yep.
So being, applying discretion and choosing, how to identify quality business, there's no shame in that. That's not a bad thing to do.
Yeah, yeah. And the other warning I would give, and you mentioned the social media aspect of the world that we live in. The other warning I would give is do not turn this situation into a potential libel or slander lawsuit.
Hmm.
And especially if you have an individual or a couple of employees that were spurned by this account before the parting of the ways. I make it known that it is not okay to, trash a client openly on social media. That is
Hmm.
not something that is supposed to be done. I just let bygones be bygones and let them go their separate way. And, like I said, let karma, take care of what happens in the future. Because the last thing that you need is to be, slapped with that libel or slander lawsuit afterward. It
Absolutely.
just adds insult to injury and everything else that comes with, this potential process. So that's all I got. Anything else that we didn't hit on that you think is really poignant to kind of talk about in this process?
No, I just think it's really healthy to have those conversations and be able to say that all business is not good business. Everything is
Mhm.
not going to be a fit. The way that we get to greater profitability is finding more of the things that we're great at and being able to, become, again, a better judge on the front end of how much effort we want to extend in order to, per dollar that we want to bring in. And once we've kind of gotten to a really comfortable ratio and, you've got your formula down, lean into that.
Yep.
Sometimes the answer is not casting a wider net, it's just going deeper into the waters that are going to yield you, the catch you're looking for.
Yep. Yeah, no, most definitely. It's definitely the 80/20 rule, right? Like that's essentially what
Absolutely.
it is. So, and if you don't know what the 80/20 rule is, we've mentioned it a couple of times in earlier episodes. We might have to revisit it at some point in time, but Google's your friend. Google is
There
your
you
friend when
go.
it comes to that. So I look. I think this was a fantastic episode. I forgot to throw this plug in at the very beginning. I should have done it at the beginning, but if you are watching the recorded version or still live with us, we are looking for a production assistant. So if someone would like to help out with the program, maybe yes or no actually show up on the program, but most definitely we need help on the back end. Just kind of coordinating with guests and getting production type stuff lined up ahead of time so we have a schedule going forward, and so that we can be a little bit more proactive in terms of letting the viewers know when a certain topic is going to be addressed in the future, so that we're not just doing everything kind of like the week of. We are looking for a production assistant. So
Yes.
if anyone knows anyone, I mean, this would be a perfect. I don't know if Tony's still on, but this would be a perfect thing for like a gamma iota sigma student to help out with, and kind of get them to know the lay of the land. Or if you are a CPCU that has a niece, nephew, family member who is inside the industry or works in social media and things like that, we are more than open to also welcoming them on board if they can help us out. So if you do know anyone that fits that bill, please have them reach out to myself or Precious,
Yes.
and we will we'll discuss the opportunity with them. So with that, that's the end of the show. Make sure to tune in, everyone, at 5:30 Eastern. Myself and Heather Blevins on How to CPCU on the New Jersey CPCU channels. We'll be talking with Adam Carmichael, who does analytics over at the institutes with respect to the CPCU designation. So that should be
Very
pretty
cool.
interesting. Yep, yeah, using data to make the process of getting your CPCU more effective and more conducive to helping people get the designation, which should be really really interesting. So with that, that's all I got. Precious, have a
Awesome.
very good evening. Another one
Thank
in the
you.
books.
Yes,
I didn't
sir.
I didn't count the number of episodes. I'm gonna
You've
have.
got homework.
Yes, I
Well,
do
that'll
have
be a
homework.
task of our new production assistant. You never know.
I There you go. First task,
Boom.
count all the episodes. That would be
Yes.
fantastic. So this is Sell Like a CPCU. Remember, we are here every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So definitely catch us next week. And with that, everyone have a good afternoon and evening. Bye now.
Thank you. See ya.